Hey guys, welcome back to Croc. Now we're gonna do the rest of the interviews. Yeah, the last part was just way too long. So yeah, that's why I just cut it there, like ended it there. Like I wasn't sure how much space I have left, but I've got like plenty. So yeah, this is just gonna be the rest of the Crocipedia. Okay, he was a composer for Croc and Croc 2.
My name's Justin Charvona and I was the audio lead on Croc, Legend of the Gobbos. I joined Argonaut in 1992 and I was their first in-house audio guy, and at that point I'd already been working in the games industry for several years, so I was coming in as a sort of experienced musician, composer, coming in to work on the Super Nintendo titles that they were working on at the time. Yeah, I stayed at Argonaut until it shut down, so I was there for 12 years. I'm guessing that I started work on Croc in '96, because I know that a lot of the music was pretty much ready by '97, in the sort of spring of '97. So I probably started work late '96, and the sort of early Croc was Croc sort of in the first levels of the game. So early days of Croc, that I would see Croc jumping around in his primitive form. The early days of working on Croc were very much leave me to it and I'll see what I can come up with music-wise. There was no specific discussions held that said, you know, this is the route we want to go down. I was very much free to work on it and come up with some ideas and see what fitted. Well, the first thing to say about the actual composition is that there was a team of us writing music. So there were three of us in-house working on the project. So the Argonaut audio team was myself and Gwyn and Karen and also Richard, who was our programmer. Um, so Gwyn was a friend of mine from school, and one of his great accomplishments was that he went to Cambridge and studied music, and so with his extra orchestration skills, we gave him the job of the cutscene music in Croc, which you'll find is much more heavily orchestrated, and that really was you know, using his skills as best. He also did some of the level music as well. And he's also, I think he plays the guitar on the credits. So, whereas I played the bass throughout all the levels. So he's a very accomplished musician and writer. And also Karen, who again has a music degree and a great orchestrator. She helped me write a lot more of the level music, so she was more that side of things, so similar to what I did, similar role. And then obviously Richard, who was our programmer, who you know, one of the great things that he managed to do was play looped CD music on the PlayStation, which was obviously new to him, new to all of us. And that was one of the important things that we wanted to do, was to make sure that the music, even though it's compressed, would play and just play. And he managed to do that. I remember he spent many hours trying to figure out how to do that, and he did it perfectly. So the quantity of music is sort of equated to the fact that there were three people working on it. It wasn't all me, so I'm not going to take all the credit. When we first started, I think we had probably a couple of different styles of level that I remember looking at. That clearly there was a sort of foresty green level, and then there's also the desert style, and those were the two sort of distinct styles that I remember I first worked on. And it was really just a case of definitely with the desert style, I was thinking this is sort of South American Latin style. That's something that I'd like to try. And with the foresty green, that was just a sort of non-specific style, just happy, cute, bouncy music. So there wasn't really a strategy. It was more, this is what I feel will work. Let's see what happens. In writing the music, definitely, you know, you're thinking about the fact that this is being played constantly while Croc is on the screen, and he's in a very colourful world with cute little characters jumping around. So, you know, you have to bear that in mind and keep the music up and happy and bouncy, and that's done in a sort of way that doesn't change throughout, even though yes, you are in a more spooky environment. It's more done using different instruments just to give different feels throughout. So yeah, rather than changing the tone of the game, there is a distinct happy bounciness throughout. There's a few different things that we did to keep the sort of continuity. One is that when I had written some of the themes that you hear throughout, we would really specifically be trying to incorporate them into each tune, whoever was writing. And some of the core instruments that I was using, we would share. So, you know, if I'm using a certain set of instruments and that palette, someone else would also use those same instruments to write music with. They wouldn't suddenly start again and come up with a different set of instruments. So because we had that kind of core set of themes and core instruments, I think that kept the continuity quite well between us. And then people could add in little elements that they'd come up with. So it's sort of sprinkled with each of our individuality. What tends to happen throughout the levels is that you'll hear a theme, and then really what the other versions of the music are, they're called what we'd refer to as variations. They're variations of the melody and the arrangement, and maybe they have less instruments in them. They're just really like, there's like a core theme that sets the level, and then the rest of the music is sort of a variety of versions of that theme. One of the things that you have to remember about that era was that we were starting to have CD-based music in games. So there was a definite move into using music that was recorded professionally in studios, and some of the bigger titles were licensing music. So we were very much aware that our competitors may have brilliantly recorded pieces of music in their games. So we had to do something that was getting there using our recording studio, and, you know, just generally using a higher quality of instrumentation, which at times means things like hiring in session musicians to play on the themes, just so that we were in really competing better. The team just sort of acknowledged the music as we added it, as yeah, that's cool. So yeah, I don't want to sort of go on record to say there wasn't any great moment that happened. We did incrementally put the music in the game. That's obviously, it wasn't suddenly like we had 20 finished pieces and we gave them all to them and said, what do you think? It was, you know, 1 or 2 a week maybe, I don't know. But so that there wasn't an opportunity for that really to happen. I think we put pieces in and everyone just accepted them and obviously liked them, because there really wasn't anyone saying we got to change this doesn't fit. That just never happened. So I think that definitely the way it worked was we would produce music and everybody seemed pretty positive about it, and just left us to it because they knew that we were going in the right direction.
Alright, on to the next interview. Producer at Fox. There was a Croc 1 and 2 Game Boy Color game? Huh. Okay, didn't know they existed.
My name is David Stalker, and I was at Fox Interactive. I was the producer on Croc Legend of the Gobbos. I started at Fox in April of 1997, and the first job that I did there was to fly out to Argonaut in the UK and get familiar with the game. I remember reading design documents on the plane out there and met the team and got down and getting nitty-gritty with the game as soon as I landed. Yeah, when I got there, the game was pretty far along, and it had its identity. There was no more kind of like, what is this game? The game really was pretty well established. Most of the levels were there, and it was in a process of tuning and tweaking, fixing bugs mostly. So you could get a really good sense of the game, and the character, the cute characters, the world, everything was just, it really gripped you and just sort of like made it seem like this was a really cool family friendly product that had some legs. Croc was kind of standing on its own at that point on the PlayStation as being the only really fully 3D world that you could, that it was the only really fully 3D platform game. You had other games like Crash Bandicoot, where Crash was essentially on a rail through a 3D environment, and of course Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64. But this was something that was largely thought to be unthinkable on the PlayStation. Other 3D games that had come out had been things like Jumping Flash, where you were jumping between these sort of like large isolated island areas in space. And this was a real attempt to have a full 3D environment within the limitations of the PlayStation. As far as I understand it, the Nintendo 64 had far more polygon pushing power and was really designed to be able to create the kind of 3D world that Super Mario 64 did. Whereas the PlayStation, it was really more of a stretch for the PlayStation to be able to do those same kind of things. The design of Croc was definitely conscious of the limitations of the PlayStation while trying to push those limits as far as possible. And so the design concept was to have these sections of gameplay, essentially like 3D rooms that you would walk into, and each room would have its own puzzle essentially. And you could look around and try and understand what the puzzle was, how you had to finish the task in this section to get to the door that would connect you to the next section. If the PlayStation had no limits, then the world would have been wide open and you would have just moved from section to section naturally. But again, because of this sort of like the polygon limits and the draw distance limits that were limiting things, the team came up with this system of stringing together different rooms to create a larger space. The Croc music was one of the first things that jumped out at you. It was, again, at the time when I started at Fox Interactive, the music was largely done and there was a lot of it. Each level had sort of a slight variation on the theme for that general area. The theme tune is of course catchy as heck. All these years later, I still can't get that tune out of my head, and I doubt I ever will. So it's really one of the it just all contributes to the cuteness and charm of the character. Just the island setting, the music, the slightly different themes to the music, the instrumentation as you move into an ice world versus the jungle sort of world, and into the castle and things like that. It was all very fitting, and again, there was far more of it than there would be, I think, in many other games, and it was one of the things that we really wanted to push, and let players listen to it as a soundtrack as much as just play it. So the time that Croc was under development, controllers were limited to digital up, down, left, right buttons, and that's what the game was developed for. As we got close to release, Sony suddenly announced that they were coming out with the first DualShock analog with 2 analog sticks, and that was very exciting, but it came late in the development of Croc, and of course that was not something that was going to be bundled with the PlayStation at that point. That was going to be an extra purchase that you would have to make. So while we really wanted to make use of that controller, it's not like we could completely throw out all of the development and base the controls purely on that. So we, within the time that was available, we did our best with like prototype controllers and things like that to actually incorporate that style of control. And now, decades later, of course, that's the standard. Every game system ships with analog controls now, and that's what everybody's used to. So the game will preserve the original controls, but also take advantage of all of those years of experience and allow analog control as well. So I think that's going to be a big step up from the original, while still preserving the original experience for those who want to go back and remember turn left, turn right, go forward, go back. Croc was hugely successful for Fox Interactive at the time when the PlayStation market was still relatively small compared to what it is today. We sold, I think, over 3 million units worldwide, and Sony had a program actually where once you sold a certain, it's kind of like a gold record, platinum record kind of thing. Once you sold a certain amount of units, you were able to get an award as such. And I have a couple of the Croc ones here, which I'll tell you in a minute how I got. This is the original Croc Legend of the Gobbos release. This award was for 250,000 copies manufactured. And then later, again, I don't remember the rules, but after a certain point, you are allowed to release a greatest hits version. And so when Croc came out on greatest hits, we received another award. And this one was for more than 500,000 copies. So there's 750,000 copies there. And these things are enormously heavy. They're on some kind of composite, and this is obviously metal, and I think they must weigh about 10 pounds each. We had them on the wall at Fox, and when Fox was closing down at the 2003, I think it was 2003 or 4, they had nowhere to go. And so as the producer of the game, I decided that I would keep them, and I took care of them and wrapped them up in bubble wrap and kept them in a box until today. So I still have them. And there's a couple of other little mementos that I have here. This was a award that I think is just a ratings award for a magazine that we got, Computer Gaming World, I think it is. Yep, Computer Gaming World gave us 4 stars for Croc. And then I have this Attractive Facts, which is the Parents' Choice Award, which I guess it means that Croc was officially approved by the Parents' Choice organization, which is kind of nice. I mean, again, it was a universal, inoffensive, fun game for the whole family. And then I also have a couple of one sheets that were just made by Fox to give out to retailers and such, just to demonstrate the success of Croc. I think, again, this was, at this point, we said over 1 million units sold. Croc is a proven seller. And at that point, the claim was that there would be 9 million new PlayStation game consoles sold between now and Christmas. And that was in 1998. So, as I say, different world, very different numbers from the kind of saturation that we see today of games consoles. If somebody's familiar with Croc from its original release and plays the new version now, I think it will play like they remember it. I think that their imagination and how they remember the graphics looking and things like that, the upgrades that have been made will come up to that standard. I think if they played the original on an emulator, say, or an old PlayStation, if they happen to have one lying around, on a current TV, I think it would fall far short of their memory. But I think that this new release, again, the music is already high quality. Playing it through a high quality sound system, watching it on a great TV, I think it's going to take somebody right back to that experience, and I think they'll love it.
Who's this one? VP Product Development at Fox. He was part of the Simpsons wrestling game.
My name is Paul Provenzano. I was the head of product development for Fox Interactive from its founding in 1995 until around 2000. My first interaction with Croc was probably late 95. One of the great things about Argonaut and of Jez in general, there was always something fascinating he wanted to show you. He had new technology, something really cool. So you'd go there and he'd say, look at this, listen to this, it's 3D sound, or something amazing. It's the nature of Jez, his curiosity, his pursuit of everything. So I was in there, and I was taken to a Sega Saturn dev system, and on it there was a blocky character, and he was running around free, but also going through some tunnels, I don't know what they were, wasn't a lot of detail. But the goal was to get it on PlayStation. There was just a shortage of PlayStation dev systems in the office, apparently. And if you think back to that time, seeing that was amazing. We just hadn't seen that before. And obviously, I looked at that and said, okay, this is something new. You've got to get a game designer something connected to this and pitch it to us. Because this is cool. Jez indicated even back then that this was going to be based on an idea they want to hold on to, an original IP, which understandably so. It did present some challenges. For obvious reasons, the reason for a Fox Interactive was to take advantage of the various Fox properties throughout that universe, whether it's the films or TV or whatever. They had book publishing, a whole bunch of things. And we were pretty busy doing that. You got Aliens, you got Simpsons, you got X-Files, you have movies that are coming out. That's our mission. But the other part of our mission was, sort of understated, was, okay, you've got all these properties and you take them through the various iterations of media. Is it possible to take something the other way? And so that was the intriguing kind of going forward idea. And it looked like we were going to do pretty well with some of these licenses, which actually weren't licenses, were Fox properties, and maybe we had the ammunition to do that. But it didn't happen immediately. We signed on officially, I believe, almost a year later. And by that time, I forget whether it was a show in the UK or a show in the US like E3, Jez had proposed Croc formally. Now, I'd seen Croc Advance, but this was Croc as a document, as a game design, and we went forward with it. I had hired a producer fresh from the UK, a guy named David Stalker. David had come over to Los Angeles and was sitting in my office, and he said, "Okay, well, what am I doing?" And he said, "You're getting on a plane, you're going over to Argonaut, and you're going to immerse yourself in this game," which he did. The thing about Croc, and the thing about its development, normally in a development, if you're a publisher and you have an existing property, that means you're babysitting that property. That means you're watching out that it looks like the property it came from, that it looks like Bart Simpson, that it is true to the world that it came from. And a lot of your time is doing that, and also worrying about assets and voice and music and things that are all true to the original property. Obviously with Croc that wasn't the case. We became more of a sounding board. David became an ally. And by that time, by the time we were signed, we had a rather robust testing system. We had a lot of people in place, so we became a testing center. Also, the unique nature of this team, the talents of the people, the tools they developed, whatever, meant that in my recollection, compared to a lot of other projects, this was not coming to us with a million bugs. This was not coming to us with the typical problems that are part of the development process. Nobody was doing anything wrong when you have bugs. You get bugs. But this stuff was coming to us because it was so well thought out, so planned. Their process, the tools they built that allowed them to build, just worked on a level that, it wasn't typical of other projects. So when I say that this was totally the creation of Argonaut, there were a few intrusions. I'm neither here nor to defend, I'm here to acknowledge. There is, in the original manual for PlayStation, a description of the origins of Croc. That document was the creation of our marketing department. We had been working with a writer's assistant for The Simpsons. He wasn't a writer, he was a writer assistant. Although many writer's assistants become a writer for a show, he was not at the time. He had done some work on another title we did called Virtual Springfield. And the marketing people got a hold of this guy. His name was Neil Alsop. His name still is Neil Alsop. And he wrote The Origins of Croc. I never saw it, and Argonaut never saw it until they saw it in the manual, much to their surprise. I can't say it was true and in line with what was going on in the game. Okay, I can say that. It really wasn't true or in line with what was going on in the game. Late in the game, literally late in the game, it was pointed out that the levels didn't have names. And that it just sort of went from one level to another. And a lot of people comment about the sense of humor of the game and look at the titles of the levels, the titles, how funny they were. Those were basically created overnight over at Argonaut. Said, oh, you want names? There's some names. There was one issue. Um, it cropped up in the last few weeks, and I'm sure other people talk about it. Sony released an analog controller literally a couple of weeks before we were going to ship. And remember, back in those days, um, there were no patches, there were no downloading an update. When you finished a game, you were done. It was done. And also, the game world existed under a certain set of parameters. The most important part of it was Christmas. Most games made most of their income back then at Christmas, which meant you had to get in line for publishing, for manufacturing, from these hardware makers well in advance. If it was August and you were still worrying about, wonder when I'll get finished with the game, well, that was pretty much a guarantee you missed Christmas, which for some companies was a disaster. So understand, when somebody says, hey, we've got this new thing, it's not shipping with the regular PlayStation, but people will have it. Do you support it? Obviously, the decision was made to support it. And every effort was made. It was an admirable effort. I don't think anybody says, oh, this is exactly how we wanted to do it. But honestly, there weren't any good examples of how you were supposed to do it. They literally had handed it in our lap a couple of weeks before we were supposed to be done. Hats off to the Argonaut team. They did it. Now, the remaster of the game builds on decades of refinement of those kind of controls and creates something that's very acceptable to the modern player. But at the time, none of those rules existed. It was just basically, here it is. Here's some documentation. And we still made our date. We still got out for Christmas. And again, it's that team at Argonaut that made it happen. Did we realize we had something special? Yes, we realized we had something special. Did we have an uphill battle in getting that message out? Honestly, yes, we did. And this is more marketing and less development, but it was blatantly obvious. If you think about 3D platform games that were appearing all at once, and a lot of it developed all at once, so it's not like, we knew exactly what everybody else was doing. If you look at Mario and Nintendo, well, Nintendo launched with that on their hardware. If you look at Spyro or Crash Bandicoot, both of those were developed by companies that were eventually part of Sony. And Sony was also pushing a hardware platform. We were not. Their motivations and their ability to promote and market far exceeded our ability to do that. The PlayStation was initially launched, and that's with the big action games. That's where you're showing off the tech. And then you pivot to kids games, to cute games. And that was that point that PlayStation was at. It was very important to have those. That's my opinion. Nintendo, that's what they did. Nintendo was known for those style of games. We still got a fair amount of attention. We still were able to find an audience. The game did really well. It exceeded our expectations. And honestly, that was the dedication, that was the creativity, that was the studio that allowed all of those things to flourish, to allow something so unique to be created. I think if Croc was your favorite game and you approach this remaster, I think a couple of things are going to happen. First of all, you remember your favorites, something you love. You don't remember the flaws, you remember what you loved about it. You don't remember Croc as being, oh, it had limitations on the hardware system. Oh, there was polygon tearing. You remember the game you loved. You don't remember Croc as a low poly character hopping around. You remember playing the box art. I think they will approach the remaster with nostalgia, but they'll also approach it as, this is the game I remember. And they're going to be able to see the same control system, if they want to use, the keypad. But they're also going to see a modern camera and a modern control system that is the evolution of gaming since Croc. And so they're not going to remember the difference. They're going to remember the version they like to play. I think that the reception is going to be warmly welcomed, but I think a lot of people are going to look at it saying, this is the game I loved. What's the big deal? Except that they can play it on modern hardware, except that they'll be able to share it with friends who will look at it with modern eyes and go, yeah, it seems pretty cool. And speaking of those people, for someone that Croc wasn't their favorite game, but they look at it and say, okay, I like these kind of games. And they're going to remember there was a time when games were a lot more just fun. They had a sense of humor about themselves. They had some challenge to them, but they were playful. And whether it's the amazing music or the humor in the game or those sometimes challenging puzzles, I think they're going to look at Croc and they're going to say, this game delivers all those things. And it's going to deliver it in a way that's very acceptable to the modern player. So I think it's going to be well received in the same way it was well received the first go round.
Oh, well, that was a long one. Seven left. Jesus. Okay, I have no idea who these people are. Well, they did Five Nights at Freddy's.
Hi, we're the Living Tombstone. I'm Yoav. Yoav Landau. I started the Living Tombstone in 2011 with the intent of combining music production with being part of internet culture and fandoms.
And I am Sam Haft. I'm the other half of the Living Tombstone, and together we make a fine team.
Yay!
So the reason that TLT makes so much content in gaming is because that's the culture that we belong to ourselves.
Yeah, a lot of it comes from the aspect that Croc, like many nostalgia games from the past, like internet culture likes to like communicate with itself on things that we all grew up with, because that's kind of what's happening on the internet, is that we all share things that like we feel like we're personally engaged with things that we really care about, but because of the internet, it's like, oh, I wasn't the only one who really liked about this by myself, playing on the TV by myself when, my mom was in the kitchen and I was like playing PlayStation, playing Croc. So it's like, it's much more common than you think. And I think because of it, that's like what we are very much about when it comes to how we go about making music. Is that it's really just about how common it is versus thinking that it's something in solitude you do.
Absolutely. The internet is a place where anything you've ever liked, you can find a community of people who also care about it.
Yeah, exactly. When it comes to what we do in internet culture and Croc, I think it really just has to do with how shared nostalgia is for a lot of people. And I think more beyond the just shared nostalgia, I think it's the fact that the game itself was something that, like, for example, for me, it's like I grew up with the series, with the franchise, like just really enjoying I think it's the fact that the main theme of it, like you start the game and it's like, oh my God, the theme is so good. And I know it sounds like, me going like, oh, I love the theme and I just happened to remix it. But in reality, I did, grow up with how the game just entices you with how it presents itself as a very cheerful game. And then when you start playing it, you hear the characters talking. It's like very uh, like cheapy, kind of like talking to each other. And then the characters are so endearing. Like the characters that Croc tends to interact with all have like their small little personalities, and so it doesn't feel necessarily like a tutorial. It feels like there's like an island of creatures that Croc interacts with, and they're like, you can jump on this thing, and by the way, I'm the king, and it's like very adorable. It almost feels like these aren't just um, uh, you know uh, post-it notes or something that tells you how to jump.
It's a shared experience that we all have by ourselves, but we've all had those experiences on our own. And when it comes to Croc, I mean, it was so genre defying as a platformer at the time, and it really, I mean, I think the first time I played Croc was on one of those PlayStation Magazine demo discs, and I just remember thinking like, oh, this doesn't feel like other games I've played before.
So the remix of the theme came to be literally because of how, given how I remember having a very immediate reaction as a kid to hearing this for the first time when I played the game. I remember how, because there's something that's hard to kind of quantify in this day and age, because everything's so easily accessible. You can just watch gameplay footage of a game nowadays, and for me it was more like, I got the CD, I got the game on PlayStation, and now I'm in the trust of the game that my parents got me, and hopefully it's a game that I like, and hopefully it's good. And then you start playing it, and it's like the theme catches you immediately. And I'm having a lot of nostalgic reactions to it, because it's just very cheerful, but cheerful in a very like endearing, genuine way. It feels like it also captures because it's like starts you off like, in a very summer setting. The remix was the only intent of the remix is to see if, without, because the intent is to definitely modernize it, but I think it's important to still understand what made, without using too many general words, like what made the original great. But it's more like, if you can enhance it and surprise fans in ways that could make it interesting, then where does it stand now if it was releasing in this day and age, and hopefully giving the same kind of reaction to hopefully people who haven't played Croc before, to basically be like, this feels just as like grabbing in terms of like, where is it going to take you as at least as an atmosphere, as a theme. So there's more new elements added to it, more stuff that's like more common in like modern electronic music genres that exist these days, without like taking away from why this was nice, that it was simple and cool in the way that it has been done. So hopefully with how I went about it, it doesn't take away from what the original fans wanted. Because nostalgia is such a strong thing, it's really difficult to appease people who grew up with it and now they're back to it and they hear like a new version of it. Is that you don't want to take away from what they love from the original, and hopefully I've done a good job. But again, I am like the nostalgic fans of the game. I want this to be something that people get to discover again, or discover for the first time, and love what the remix stands for as a theme.
And I think part of your intent in the remix too is recapturing that feeling that we don't have a lot anymore now that culture is so immediately on demand, which is that feeling that any gamer has had who's played older games, is sitting on a title screen and just staying on it and listening to the music over and over and over again, because there's no other way to do that. There is no YouTube at the time, there is no Spotify at the time, and just being able to vibe out to this track, because on the one screen that would allow you to do that.
Mm-hmm. With nostalgia, with or without it, like admit that there are parts of Croc that did feel really interesting in terms of how it engaged with you atmospherically. So for example, I remember really liking the cave levels because of how rarely does a game know how to make you feel so like this kind of like sense of wonder with how it accomplishes different stuff, like the fact that the reverb of the PlayStation did a really good job of making the cave feel like a cave that you get to explore in, and then you have like the fog, the you know, like how the PlayStation can render some distance, so it says okay, now there's a fog in there. So all these different elements help these kind of levels make you really feel like you're there despite the limitations of what it was and how it came to be. So I think like in terms of modernizing stuff, it's like the game already had really good foundations, and now you just get to show people that the fundamentals themselves don't need to change. What it needs to what can change now is a modern game is the graphics, the sound, the way the game like plays in some capacity. I'm sure that there's people who would love more accessibility in some retrospect. You know, these are all things that you just, you know, if you had the potential to look back and say things are working great and let's leave it the way they are, versus, you know, the improvements you can make now because of modern game development. I think that's like a really cool thing. And to tie it a bit to the approach to the remix, it's the same thing. There's fundamentals that really work for the theme that I wanted to keep the way it is. And there's parts of it that I knew that if that was there or this was there, it would have made it a more interesting theme. But in no way the intent is to replace all of it or to say that this is now a different genre. The intent is, I like the fundamentals of it because it is a really good theme song, and let's lift it up because it can be very interesting if it's made now.
I think in a lot of ways, the challenge of a remake and a remaster, and to the same degree, a challenge of you remixing the theme, is to try and make the modern version true to not what the old version was, but to what the old version feels like when you remember it. I think about that with movies a lot, where there will be a movie that I loved as a teenager, and revisiting it unchanged from when I was a teenager, I think, oh no, that's not the thing that I remember liking so much. And I think that is, you know, that is the most interesting thing about a remake, is being true to the spirit of something more than being true to the exact technical specificity of everything that it was.
Right. It's like saying that because there were like, because sure, movies, because again, movies done back in the day had like technical limitations. You couldn't like do this or that. So to assume that because technical limitations are the reason the movie is bad is to ignore what the movie it was about when it comes to its very core of it being something that you grew up with and loved. Because it's like because anything can just look better because you can improve it technically, but you need to always rely on this was special for a reason, regardless of how it made you feel at the time. And I'm sure that, like, you know, the example of characters made on the PlayStation that had way fewer polygons, it's like that didn't really matter. The game was good, and if improving it technically doesn't necessarily improve the game, then you're kind of missing the point of why it was a good game.
And you're already, to a degree, you're remastering it in your head when you remember it, using the most sophisticated rendering engine that exists.
Exactly, yeah.
What's so exciting about a remake is that you can approach people who have fond memories of the original, but you can also approach people for whom The original came out long before they were playing games and is the exact type of game that is completely up their alley. And there are literally billions more active gamers now than there were when Croc came out.
Oh, 100%. And a lot of gamers who, and I feel actually that's something that I'm realizing in the landscape is that it's not always easy to find games that are in this kind of like, you know, I guess you could say cutesy caliber, because it's not often an easy game to produce these days. And I think this has to do with the factor of nostalgia and the PlayStation games, like having less to work with and imagine stuff around it. We both grew up with the game back when we were just, you know, 8 years old, I guess. And so the fact that I know as someone who's in my current age, I would love to play more games like that. I think it's not just the nostalgia of it. There is something legitimately fun with how the mechanics work and the way it still feels like, even though it existed back then, that doesn't mean that there's still games that feel this way and act this way because of it. Because people are always trying to make themselves like, you know, different in that space. I feel like this existing still now would in and of itself feel like this is still new because of how this hasn't been tackled in the exact way because of the character design, gameplay, the world building. I think there's a lot of aspects to it that are just, you know, it could never be properly replicated because you can never, you know, again, you cannot just copy it. There's something very special to it.
Absolutely. And even though games now are a lot more densely featured and have a very different standard of UI and UX and graphics, great game design is timeless.
In the end of the day, it's really cool to be involved in something that's, given how I grew up with this game, not knowing what this game was gonna be when I grew up with it, because you get the CD and you don't know what's gonna happen once you press the power button on the PlayStation, and then the game starts, and then the game slowly introduces you to its world, and you start to realize like that, you know, the game's way of pacing you through what this is and making you comfortable, and all the characters in it like are very much there to make you feel like you are a fish out of water character. Like Croc is not someone who belongs there inherently, and he slowly gets to be introduced to the world of it, going to different places, collecting gems. So even if it's like a lot of the staples of like what platformers are usually, the fact that the game just knew how to make you feel like you know, like a fish out of water character. Like you're much like the player, like just inserted the CD and start to play it. You, the player, and Croc are basically starting from square one. You're both, you have no idea where you are, let alone why are you even a dinosaur who's jumping over things and collecting gems. But that doesn't matter. Like the idea is that you're not left out as a player to feel like you're in this world for the first time, like Croc is.
Okay. Editor-in-Chief, gamesindustry.biz.
My name is James Matula. I'm editor-in-chief of gamesindustry.biz. I'm a long-running journalist in the industry, but I'm also a massive gamer, and Croc is one of my fondest memories of the 90s. My first impressions of Croc were, I remember playing around my cousin's house. This was very kind of around the time that PlayStation and Nintendo 64 had just come out. I don't believe I had a Nintendo 64 at the time. I think I was still on the original Nintendo. So the whole world of like kind of early 3D games was new to me, and it was just kind of mind-blowing playing these sort of things. And to go from, you know, kind of your typical side-scrolling Mario games to a 3D platformer like Croc, I think Croc might have been the first 3D platformer I played, was just a whole nother step up in terms of what games could be. It felt like a whole new level of what video gaming could be, and I just absolutely adored it. There was so much to enjoy in the way the game played, the character, the music, the levels, the layout, everything. I mean, even right down to the puns in the level names. And I remember just spending hours, days with my cousin, just working through Croc 1 together, like taking it in turns and just absolutely loving it. When I first played, it was Croc, the central character, was the draw. It was just, in an era of so many kind of iconic platforming mascots, people like Mario and Sonic, and obviously you had Crash Bandicoot, the year before. Like Croc standing out as like instantly a lovable character was amazing. Like, this little crocodile with a backpack, he was incredibly cute. It was the voice acting. Voice acting obviously was so new in video games. Like, we already had Mario going yah whack wahoo, but Croc also kind of having his own little personality, like the little high pitch yazoo as you do like a massive ground pound. Like it became a thing. Like I found myself saying yazoo as like jumping off things at the park. Like it was such a lovable creature, such a lovable character that that kind of kept you going. Like you enjoyed playing as that character, and it kind of served as the gateway to the rest of the game's cuteness, like collecting the little gobbos that are hidden around the different levels. Like you wanted to collect them, you wanted to rescue all of them because they're so sweet and vulnerable, especially like finding the hidden colored gems across the hidden throughout the level, and then you find one that's in a cage through the secret door at the end. Like you started to feel motivated to do this. That was like my first impressions, but then like I think as I've grown older and I've looked at video games through more kind of adult eyes and certainly through kind of more professional eyes, I really start to recognize now what the team were doing back then. Like early 3D platformers were amazing. Like every single one was a revolution to me because they were all trying to solve this problem that no one had ever done. Video games had for decades before been a very kind of left to right affair when it comes to platforming games. You start at the left hand side of the screen, you can proceed through the level, overcome the obstacles, you get to the end goal on the right. Navigating a 3D space. Navigating a 3D space was something that no one really knew how to do, and everyone had their own solutions. Nintendo showed this with Mario 64 with their kind of big open world-ish kind of levels. Crash Bandicoot had done this kind of gauntlets where you're running kind of rather than left to right, you're essentially running from the back of the level to the front of the level. And Croc splitting it into these kind of little room size sections. Like you felt like you were exploring each level. Like it wasn't just, there wasn't a start to end goal structure to the level, but it wasn't a simple A to B affair. There were different hidden chambers to find. There were different secrets to find. And you look back now and it's like, this was really impressive that a team that had never made a 3D game before managed to make a very kind of easy to navigate 3D space, one that you instantly understood what you were doing, where you were trying to go, where secrets might be. And you had this lovable character to drive through it. It was just amazing. The level puns like gave the game a personality, like even just as much as Croc did. Like it wasn't just grass stage level 1 or volcano stage level 3. It was shouting lava lava lava, which is obviously a pun on a song of the time. Like it was brilliant. Like it encouraged you to open the next level. It's like, I wonder what they call the next one. Bond fan that I am, I love that. I'm pretty sure there was a level called License to Chill, like that. It was a snow level. Like it gave a sense of fun. It's so rare nowadays to have a team like this, to have a team of 12 or so people who have a lot of creative freedom to create something that goes on to become as popular, as big, and as potentially influential and certainly revolutionary as something as Croc. Like the industry nowadays, like you look back at titles like Croc and they just wouldn't be made today because everything would be analyzed to death by executives trying to work out where the opportunities in the market were. Everything would be based on what is popular, what has worked before. This was the joy of the 90s developers who were trying to break new ground in early 3D. Was there was no precedent, there was no kind of rule book, there were no established hits. They were free to make their own choices, free to make their own rules, and lay the groundwork for what would come afterwards. And it must have been such an amazing and like privileged time to be making games back then, because you sure as heck wouldn't get that freedom now. Croc is one of those games where there's a real, almost like a spread out community around it. Like I wrote this article about the making of Croc, and when it was published, I jokingly put on Twitter like now time to campaign for a remaster. And it was one of those games that I remember well. I remember playing, I remember fondly, but it's not one that comes up in conversation a lot, because a lot of the conversation around, the most seminal, like influential titles of the 90s tends to come around like the typical ones, Mario 64, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Banjo-Kazooie, like certainly in platforming terms, and then others in other genres. And Croc is one that kind of doesn't get as much attention as it deserves, which is a large part of why I wanted to write that article. When I announced on Twitter, I published this article, now it's a campaign for a remaster, the amount of people replying, "Oh, I loved that game. I'd love to see a remaster," etc. I kind of felt like I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who remembers how good this game was. I'm not the only one who wants more. It beggars belief that Croc hasn't had a remaster before now, at least kind of attention. Like I say, like the nostalgia for the 90s has been going on so long. We've seen how well things like the Crash Bandicoot remakes and the Spyro remakes have performed. I mean, blimey, even the Gecko is getting remakes, and those kind of are notoriously not great games. And it's heartbreaking to see all these things that are getting remakes and not see Croc. So like to finally know that there is another, there is a Croc remaster in the works. It's about damn time. I don't think I fully appreciated back in the day how well the levels of Croc are designed. In the conversation I had with Nick Cusworth, who was on the team, he talked to me about how the levels were designed along the lines of, he referred to 2D platformers like Yoshi's Island, where you can take any screenshot and instantly know what it is you are supposed to be doing in that space. In any given moment of any level, you know what you're meant to do. And you look back at how Croc is laid out with this different, like room-like structure. And in any given situation, you know where you're meant to be heading. There's a clear exit, but there are likely to be some secrets, and you might see some hints of stuff that you might want to investigate. But there's a clear exit, and it's impossible to get lost in this. Other 3D platformers where they were trying to do the kind of the more open structure. Certainly on the N64 with things like Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie, because they have the capability of doing these large seamless levels, certainly large for the time. It was easy to get lost, or at least not know where you were meant to be heading, because there were so many possibilities. But with Croc, it was all kind of directed, but you never felt like you were being led by the hand. It was almost inherent that you knew, right, that's the main exit over there, so I'm going to head that way. But before I go that way, I am going to rescue that gobbo that I see up on that floating platform. I'm going to get that colored gem that I see over there. I'm going to make sure I collect as many gems as I possibly can before I clear out. You were guided, but never led. And I think and even today, that's such a hard way to design games. It's such a hard thing to nail down and get right. So to see a team that had never made a 3D game do this in like the early 90s, the mid 90s, it just baffles me. And I don't think I fully appreciated that enough back at the time. I am so looking forward to the Croc remaster, because I have missed games like Croc, and specifically Croc Legend of the Gobbos, since first playing it in the 90s. We've had a kind of resurgence of these 90s style 3D platformers. We've had the Crash Bandicoot remakes, we've had the Spyro remakes, and you play them. Like, I never played the Crash Bandicoot games in the day, but playing the remakes, it feels like, wow, this is how video games used to be. This is how video games should be, because there's not as much of this style anymore. So to go back to a property that I'm familiar with, I can't wait. I've honestly been looking at watching videos of people playing through Croc on like YouTube, and like watching it in its original PS1 blockiness, and I still get excited at the idea of playing that. The music instantly takes me back to that time. The soundtrack is one of my go-to work soundtracks for, I'll just have it on in the background to kind of give me that lift up. And like, it's such a like chirpy, happy, uplifting soundtrack. Like, nostalgia always plays a large part in these things. You always go back to games and worry that is it not going to be as good as I remember? But just watching it in its original form online, it absolutely is what I remember. It absolutely is going to be what I remember. And I cannot wait to see how it looks when it's fully refreshed and fully revamped. Some of the remasters we've seen in the last few years have breathed new life into something and made it feel brand new. I'm looking forward to playing a Croc remaster with my kids, because my kids are used to kind of more modern games, but introducing them to an absolute classic presented in a modern style, I just can't wait for it.
Okay. Writer Forbes.
So my name is Mitch Wallace. I'm currently a Forbes contributor covering the video game industry. I've also written about games for several different outlets like Wired, Tech Radar, Games Radar. Contributed to a couple cool kids books by Scholastic about video games. And then, you know, sort of apropos to this interview, I sort of got my start in games writing about Croc for a UK print publication called Retro Gamer, and been writing about games ever since. So my gaming experience before I was a pro and sort of how I got introduced to Croc. Well, I mean, I've been gaming since the Atari days. So, you know, mid to late 80s, introduced to the Atari 2600. You know, after that, the NES, you know, all those classics on the NES like Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Brothers. And I was just hooked from the get-go. Got my PlayStation in 1995, around launch. Funny story, I actually rented a PlayStation from a local video game store with, like, you know, Mortal Kombat 3 and Battle Arena Toshinden. And it just felt like the future, the PlayStation. The N64 came out the following year in 96, and I think if you were a PlayStation owner in 1996, you were kind of like side-eyeing that console, because Super Mario 64 obviously launched with that machine, and, you know, there was nothing quite comparable on the Sony PlayStation to Super Mario 64. You know, we had Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot obviously was a lot more linear. You know, it wasn't free roaming like Super Mario 64. So I think that's where that PlayStation jealousy kind of crept in. You know, like, we want something like Super Mario 64, but Crash Bandicoot's kind of like it. But then the gaming magazines started talking about Croc. Early 97, I want to say it was. And it immediately caught my interest. And because I was just into 3D platformers, I loved sort of colorful, you know, more family-friendly stuff at the time. And Croc just looked like it just fit the bill. You know, it was a cute character, colorful world, kind of pastel colors, and the key thing there was it was like more free roaming than Crash Bandicoot. And I was like, oh, that I'm interested in. You know, it's like there's going to be more to this than Crash in a way. And yeah, and just sort of tracked it up until its release in, I want to say it was like September-ish 97, and got it on release day. This is my original Croc copy from back in the day. That also kind of coincides with the dual analog controller, which I actually have right here. The dual analog that I had, that I played Croc on back in 97. And this is, you know, the precursor to the DualShock. And it's kind of a rare controller at this point. It's got the concave analog sticks. It's got the longer, like, handles, some differences on the shoulder buttons too. And I was thrilled because Croc supported analog control, which, you know, up until that point, PlayStation hadn't introduced. PlayStation, when it launched, was kind of the edgy game console. You know, it was like you had like Wipeout and Loaded and, you know, more sort of mature angled games, whereas the N64 was, you know, right out of the gate with Super Mario 64. It did have that family-friendly flair. And I think maybe even starting around the time of Croc, PlayStation was starting to get some of those, you know, just games that had a friendlier aesthetic. Like, you know, it wasn't so gritty, it wasn't so adult or grown up. And I think there was probably like a subset of PlayStation gamers like me who were sort of craving, I guess, some more of that innocent gaming that we had experienced on, say, the Super Nintendo or the NES. And Croc, I think, even though it was 3D, it was kind of a throwback to those days of like bright colors and just like a fun adventure that you would go on. It's not heavy, it's not serious. It's just, and there's a lot of good humor in Croc, with the Gobbos, potato, potato. And yeah, the music was incredible. Justin Charbona, I actually interviewed him for the Retro Gamer article I wrote, and that was definitely part of the draw for me as well. Because as soon as you drop into the first level, there's just like this serene music that sort of envelops you in that space. And another kind of funny story, slightly embarrassing. When I would play Croc, a lot of times I wouldn't actually play Croc. I would just like sit in the world and like make up my own game, like in my imagination. And I would just spend, an hour just like running around the same level, like looking at rocks, listening to the music, being at peace. I was a strange kid. But it was sort of like, I was also kind of a lonely kid too. And Croc was one of those games that was sort of like a balm, or like it just made me feel good because it wasn't so heavy, it wasn't so serious. So yeah. What surprised me about sort of diving into the history of Croc? Well, first of all, it was just an honor talking to a lot of those guys because they made this game that I loved growing up, and it was. I think one of the things that surprised me was the sort of pioneering nature of that era of game development, especially in 3D games. It was like, even now, if you go back and play Croc, it's you can feel the developers sort of like trying to figure out how 3D games are supposed to work. And actually, this week I played Croc with the dual analog again, and was actually kind of surprised just all these years later, even after I did a lot of sort of the deep diving into Croc, that they actually got a lot of stuff right off the bat. Like, I know when you control Croc digitally, it's more of the tank controls, like sort of Tomb Raider style. And I also know, talking to Nick Cussworth, the lead designer, he said that they got the dual analog like really late in development. Yeah, and he wasn't thrilled about that, and he didn't think the implementation was up to his standards. But using it again, even last night, like, you move the camera with the right stick. Croc has some nuanced degrees of movement with the left stick. Like, they got the elements in there. It's like it wasn't as polished as, say, like a Mario 64, which that was like some black magic or something. I'm not sure what. Yeah, so that was surprising. Just that they did get so much right, start out of the gate, having to figure stuff out themselves. There weren't examples to look at. It's like, I think back to more PlayStation history, it's like, no, Spyro the Dragon wouldn't come along until like a year later in '98. That was, more perfected the 3D formula, or like Gex Enter the Gecko, or there was sort of more of like a tidal wave of stuff that could tweak those base elements that came along within Croc. And I think the other thing that surprised me when I was talking to a lot of those guys was just the passion they had for that project. Whether it was the art or the coding or the designing, they really cared about that game. And that I find that era of game development just fascinating in general, because it was smaller teams. It feels like there was a lot more passion. People were closer to the projects. It wasn't teams of 300 people. I won't name any studios, but yeah. So I find that era very inspiring, charming, and it's no surprise that something like Croc came out of that sort of soup. Yeah, sort of that naivete and that sort of scrappiness. Like, there's a magic to that with anything creative. Like, if you're just sort of pushing through the fog or the mist and just like mapping new terrain as you go, like yeah, there's something special about that. I think the music is incredible. The score, the Justin Charvona's soundtrack was a huge reason why I just like to just sort of stick around and explore Croc's world. And he used some really unconventional like instruments in the soundtrack. Like it's very like trumpet heavy. He said that he used theremin, you know, in a lot of like the spookier segments, like the underground levels. There was like clarinet or oboe. I was never sure exactly which one it was, and sort of the more serene levels. So yeah, unconventional soundtrack, but definitely helped give Croc its own identity. How did I sort of find out that Croc might be coming back? I don't know. I mean, obviously there was the sort of cryptic tweet from Jez San. That was, you know, the more like the official tip off. But I feel like for years there's just been, you know, the rumor mill is always churning, and it's always like, I don't know if it was more of a rumor as more of like there was like a growing surge of people who wanted Croc to come back. Like everyone who grew up with Croc kind of looked around at some point and was like, okay, well, Crash got a remaster, Spyro got remastered. Well, we like this game too. We loved Croc. So like I think it was more of like a groundswell of just people just sort of demanding that something be done with the franchise, whether like a new Croc come out or, you know, they remastered the first two. So I think by the time I saw Jez's tweet, it almost felt like it had been confirmed already. You know, it was like, oh, like I knew this was happening, but now Jez said it's happening, so it's for sure happening. And I think after talking to the guys in 2016, like Nick and Jez and all them, like I knew there was some desire there to bring it back. I think even when I spoke to Jez in 2016, he was throwing around the idea of like maybe bringing it back. I can't quite remember. It's been a while, but yeah, how will new kids come to Croc? I almost made a new kids on the block joke, but I could have rhymed it too. The standards for gaming have changed so drastically. You know, if you're a young person who's heavy into gaming now, you're now viewing Croc through, I mean, even if you've played the Spyro and Crash remasters / remakes, those were retooled in pretty serious ways to accommodate a modern audience. So I think a lot of young people will come to it interested. Will people be viewing the Croc remaster through sort of nostalgia glasses, even with like updated visuals sort of thing? I don't know. That's always a tough one when old games get remastered. That's always sort of at the forefront of the discourse, because it's like, you know, when you play an older game that's been remastered, you can feel that it's dated in some ways, you know, because it's from a particular era, it's from a particular time period, particular sort of design philosophies of that whatever decade that was. Do I think that people will still appreciate it? I think absolutely. I think as a sort of like historical piece, people will definitely appreciate it. As a nostalgia piece, yes. And I think they'll still be able to enjoy it because back in 1997, you know, when I got my shiny new dual analog, it was like everything was new. This was all novel. It was like I didn't have any standards by which to judge Croc other than like, this is the first sort of truly 3D game on the PlayStation that I can roam around in and explore. So it was like, it doesn't matter if these controls are kind of janky. They were the best we had. And now I just sound like old man screaming at clouds. But
okay, fortunately, it's getting this part's getting long now, and I'm about to pass out. Sorry. Yeah, the next part would definitely be the final part. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you when I make it. See ya.